With the new Hunter and the Beast DLC, we're getting access to 4 brand new heroes as part of Marcus Wulfhart's campaign. Now, we don't really know exactly what these heroes bring to the table quite yet. We just simply kind of know their names. We know of Jorek the Grimm, a brilliant master engineer who is a dwarf, as you guys have pointed out to me. Rodrik Liangui, Hertwig Vonn Hall, and Kalara of Wydrioth. And each one of these characters adds something to Wulfhart's campaign. We know that Hertwig Vonn Hall is a witch hunter, Calera is a waystalker, and Roderick is a paladin, a Bretonnian paladin. So in this video today, I want to talk about the actual real lore behind each one of these 4 characters. Each one of them has already been established, or is in the example of Hertwig Vonn Hall, he's actually been morphed from one character into another. But the rest of these have rules, or lore in their 8th edition army books or in a white dwarf. So today we're going to jump into each one of these characters, see a little bit about their lore. We're going to read the lore blurbs from their respective book or where they correspond to, and then talk about maybe the synthesis or the genesis of this character as it's kind of morphed into what we see now in Total War Warhammer. And the first character we're really going to jump into is Hertwig Vonn Hall, because he has such a interesting backstory, and he has attached to his backstory an even bigger backstory in his last name. So let's talk about that first, Vonn Hall. And we've talked about this a little bit in some other videos, but this is the very famous witch hunter family, the Van Hal family. This is very similar to Van Helsing, right? And the whole story of Dracula and so on and so forth. And it's got that same exact connotation. This family that is known for hunting witches and purifying all manner of undead. And it really stretches back all the way to Frederick Vonn Hall, one of the very first, I guess, primogenitor of the Vonn Hall family line. And this guy actually ends up becoming very well-known and infamous necromancer, and expands into what we actually see in Total War Warhammer when we look at the lore of vampires, Van Hel's Dance Macabre. So because he changes his name to Van Hel, so you get this very rich lore in this character and in this last name in and of itself. He himself was a former priest of Mor, and the priest of Mor, the cult of Mor, as we know, is they spend most of their time worshiping, or at least venerating, the dead, protecting and guarding graveyards and people that are doing funeral marches towards graveyards to bury people, so on and so forth. So that plays very heavily into what we will get into with Hertwig. But the Van Hel line lives on to this day with Johann Vonn Hall, which is one of the witch hunter generals. There's 4 witch hunter generals of the Empire, which is one of the coolest titles I think I know of in the entirety of the Warhammer world, is witch hunter general. It sounds cool, and it doesn't sound useless like postmaster general does in the United States. But regardless here, Johann Vonn Hall is one of the current witch hunter generals and the current descendant of the Van Hel family line, which you have stuff like Helmut Vonn Hall, who is the one who actually slayed Pieter von Karstein, and you have oops, you have Gunther Vonn Hall, which is the one that actually besieged the Blood Keep. So this very important witch hunter family line that has stretched on for hundreds of years. Now, when we look at Hertwig Vonn Hall, we have to look at a different character. We have to look at Dr. Hertwig Tyseman, which is actually a character from the 2nd edition Warhammer RPG book when you look at the Agents of the Shroud. Now, a further deviation of this still is the Agent of the Shroud is a member of the Fellowship of the Shroud, which is actually, I guess you could say, like a denomination of a Morite, or someone who is from the cult of Mor. Now, rather than being kind of like a defender or someone who tends to the dead, the Fellowship of the Shroud are people who pretty much prosecute against the undead, kind of enacting a war in the same way you would see with a witch hunter. So these guys are kind of that like proto or step between the witch hunter, in that they act solely for the cult of Mor, but as I guess more of a militant arm of it. So let's read this history on Dr. Hertwig Tyseman. This is in the 2nd edition RPG book here. You're going to see that blurb pop up so you can get a little bit more information on him. This is exactly what we're going to be reading right now. A medical scholar and physician who has turned his expertise to the detection of the vampire, Dr. Tyseman's reasons for combating the undead are quite personal. During his younger days, he was a respected doctor who practiced his beneficent arts in Nuln. He saved countless lives and his reputation grew daily. He was destined, it seemed, to live a peaceful and prosperous life, aiding his fellow man. This was not meant to be. A corpse was found in an alleyway behind a seedy bar, and through its heart was a stake. The watch brought the corpse to Tyseman, wondering if he could shed any light on this bizarre murder. Dr. Tyseman unwisely removed the stake to examine it for evidence. That night, the vampire returned to life. Dr. Tyseman found the creature with its fangs in the neck of his beloved fiancée, Katharina. Enraged, the doctor seized the stake and plunged it back into the breast of the vile monster, but for Katharina, it was too late. She died, and to prevent her from rising from the dead, Dr. Tyseman himself drove hawthorn through her heart and removed her head. That night, the doctor sought out the fellowship, and since then has dedicated himself to seeing that his own tragedy is never repeated. So again, a very deep-seated lore in this character from a 2nd edition RPG, from the whole entire Van Hell line kind of combined into this. And it's interesting to see how Creative Assembly took a character and didn't just say it's Hertwig Tyseman. They made him a Van Hale. And I'm cool with that. I like the kind of blending of these two really cool characters and their backstories, right? With the Van Hell line and Hertwig Tyseman's own personal story, and it leads into him clearly being towards some sort of combating of the undead. It makes a lot of sense to me. Like that is probably going to be what his primary focus is going to be. When we read the description from the Steam Powered page, we see Hertwig von Hale, a skilled physician and witch hunter, has traveled far from home on his quest for ultimate vengeance. And that vengeance, I think, is again hinting towards him being something of a boon when it comes to fighting undead. So that is Hertwig von Hall. But let's jump into another character that has a bit of an obscure start as well. And that character is Prince Rodrik Liangui. Now, we know him to be a Bretonnian paladin. We know him to be a disgraced Bretonnian paladin from the Steam page. To read this blurb from it, Rodrik Liangui was a renowned paladin. Disgraced and exiled, however, he is haunted by a past he cannot escape. And really, he comes to us from White Dwarf number 304, 305, which it's funny that sometimes when I look back at some of these old White Dwarfs, I know I have them sitting in a box back home. And it was from a time in White Dwarf when they were trying to do a campaign centered around Lustria, when they gave basically a focus on smaller war bands moving through some of the temple cities of Lustria, trying to loot and pillage them. It was Lustria in the New, or a Conquest of the New World, and it was Warhammer Realms Lustria. It was kind of the name of that White Dwarf supplement, as it were, quote unquote. And the way that this was meant to be was you could create these characters and create a narrative to them, and that narrative would play itself out across this campaign, and whether or not they lived to survive depended upon how your fights went. And that's the same thing with Prince Roderick. Here is the blurb from the White Dwarf directly. In the year 1847, the Bretonnian noble Duke Tudual of Liangui dispatched his much-loathed bastard son, Prince Roderick, on an expedition deep into the jungle of Lustria, hoping, some say, that the obnoxious youth would not return. Many tales are told of the young prince cutting a swath through the eastern jungles, plundering Lizardmen ruins, and even attempting an ill-advised assault upon Amazon Island. But he overstretched his luck when he launched an attack upon the temple city of Zloan-Hualpek, not realizing that it was in fact a fully functioning city and not some poorly guarded ruin. The Lizardmen observed his nonchalant approach and allowed the army to enter the city before launching a devastating ambush that wiped out the bulk of the invaders' forces in moments. Prince Roderick and his officers survived the slaughter, but still had to escape Zloan-Hualpek, and hundreds upon hundreds of enraged Lizardmen intent on seeing their blood. Now you can see that it ends in an ellipses, and then the next couple pages go into a mini battle report, kind of chronicling Prince Roderick's band against these Lizardmen, and ultimately the end of this White Dwarf shows that Prince Roderick loses that fight, and the narrative is then created that he dies to a man, with Prince Roderick being the last one to fall. So you get this really kind of cool, rich narrative built into these narrative campaigns that Games Workshop used to run, typically during the summertime. That's when you get stuff like Shadows over Albion. I I don't remember if Storm of Chaos was a summer or a fall campaign, but you get a lot of these very enriching campaigns that they would pop up every so often in the White Dwarfs. So that's where Prince Rodrik comes from, right? We get this renowned paladin that has a penchant, it seems, for attacking and besieging lizardmen. So hopefully we're going to see something that is kind of, I guess, indicative of that. A character that is going to be maybe giving us bonuses towards lizardmen. We don't really know too much about these characters. In the Let's Play, we saw that the final battle with Marcus Wulfhart is going to give us some advantages from each one of these characters, depending on which ones you bring into your army. So I'm sure as the days kind of unfold and we find out more and more about those Let's Plays and about those campaigns, we will see how these heroes play into it. But Rodrik right now, we know, is a paladin that has a huge history with lizardmen. So needless to say, I think he will be doing some sort of advantages, boons, attack, melee attack, weapon strength, or leadership bonuses towards fighting any kind of lizardmen in your Marcus Wulfhart campaign. Now, our next character, Kalara of Wydrioth, has quite a bit of lore to jump into. And when I mean just the lore blurb itself is quite massive. So we're going to jump into that right now and read through that, because her lore actually isn't mainly about her so much as about another character that she kind of is interwoven with. And this comes from the 8th edition Warhammer Army book for the Wood Elves. It's actually on the page for Orion. It's not actually on the page for Wild Riders, and you'll understand why I'm bringing up Wild Riders in just a second here. So here is the tale of Atherin. Dedicated though the Wild Riders are to the needs of their noble king, they have no pretensions to incorruptibility. Indeed, it would be laughable for any being to make such a claim in Athel-Loren, where much is illusory and the magics of the enchantments are wielded by so many and with such skill. It was to guard against subversion that Ariel placed the very first Wild Riders under an oath of secrecy that has since bound all who have worn the Hunter's mantle. Only one Wild Rider in all the years since has broken that geese. His name was Atherin of the Red Horn, and he did so not under duress, nor out of promise of wealth or godly favor, but to impress his beloved, Kalara, a princess of Wydrioth, by speaking of those hallowed secrets. Legends tell that Atherin was struck dumb in the moment of his betrayal, and sensing a greater change overtaking him, fled from his love's side and deep into the forest, where no other would witness his shame. Kalara was distraught with her loss, but no amount of searching or sorceress scrying would reveal Atherin to her. A long and mournful year passed. Kalara resolved to appease Kurnos on her beloved's behalf, and embarked upon a hunt in his name. For many months, she roamed the glades and fields of Athel-Loren, searching for a quarry worthy of the hunter god. At last, on the wide, windswept plains of Eldroth, she beheld a suitable prey, a mighty stag with a full and glorious crown of antlers. In one smooth motion, Kalara knocked an arrow to her bow and let fly. The princess did not miss her mark. The shot took the stag in his right eye, and the beast fell dead in that same moment. Eager to begin the rites that would dedicate the kill to Kurnos, Kalara spurred her steed forward through the long grass. Alas, she found no trace of the stag, but lying amongst the grasses, she discovered the naked and lifeless body of her lost love, an arrow buried deep in his skull. Thus passed Atherin of the Red Horn, though his tale lives ever on as a warning to those who might be tempted to betray Kurnos' trust. As for Kalara, she wandered, broken-hearted and desolate, for many turnings of the world, unable to forgive herself for the part she had played in Atherin's death. Only in Athel-Loren's darkest hour would she find redemption, but that is another story. And I believe she goes on to have a part in the End Times portion of the lore, and I honestly can't remember it for the life of me right now, but Kalara of Wydrioth is the Waystalker hero that we're going to be getting with Marcus Wulfhart. Now, with her backstory, we don't really know what she's going to be doing. Guy Mead mentions that she's going to be helping out with something regarding the final battle and fighting the Lizardmen, so obviously she's going to have some sort of boon to give us, but we're not really sure 100% what her advantage is going to be. Like, we know that Rodrik is going to help out against Lizardmen. We know that Hertwig is going to help out against Undead, but Kalara might help out against greenskins. We don't really know a whole ton about her from this lore blurb, and even the little portion on this has traded the forests of Athel-Loren for the jungles of Lustria in pursuit of redemption. That doesn't really give us much of a hint as to what her character will be doing in that campaign. So again, we can only wait and see what will come in the coming days of more reveals from Creative Assembly and so on and so forth. Let's jump into our last character here. Jorek the Grimm, or Jort Grimm, is a little bit more straightforward of a character by comparison. Here's his little thing from the Steam page. Jort Grimm is a brilliant master engineer. Shunned for his eccentric ideas, he has struck out alone to seek his fortune in Lustria. Let's read his lore blurb as well here. Master engineer Jort Grimm of the Cragbrow clan was responsible for many of the ironclad ship designs that now steam out of Barak Var. Grimm's well-armored fleets have been at the fore of many great victories. It is doubtful, however, that Grimm lived to see more than a few of his sea-borne fortresses built during his lifetime, and he certainly never saw his vastly useful steam engines become accepted by his conservative-minded comrades from the Guild. Grimm's long tenure with the Engineers Guild ended poorly. He was expelled for his unorthodox, if groundbreaking, work and forced to endure the embarrassing trouser legs ritual as a final indignation before being finally ousted. So, we definitely see a character that has left his homeworld in shame. And we get that a lot from all these characters, maybe except for Hertwig. Hertwig's the only character that's actually like, oh, I'm going to Lustria because I'm going to go kill some vampires. Versus, Rodrik is an ashamed bastard son. Calera is seeking redemption for her lost love and herself in a lot of ways. And Jort Grimm is left the dwarfs, I've tried to think of the name of their empire, just couldn't escape me, has left the dwarfs as a whole because he felt shunned from his the Engineers Guild. And as you can see, with a lot of stuff that you get from some of the best writers of the 17th, 18th, 19th century, that they don't really become famous until their death, when they're really more appreciated. We get the same thing with Grimm the Great, which he is now called post-mortem, it seems. And it's an interesting way to add master engineers to the, I guess, roster of the Empire. I know it's one thing that the Empire is missing is their master engineers with, like, cool mechno steeds and stuff like that. But this is a way to kind of bring that into the fore with, I guess, not giving the master engineer unit itself. So we should hopefully see something from this character that really gives a lot of benefits towards artillery. I mean, he has a skill in tabletop called Artillery Master, and we already see that from the Master Engineers in the Dwarf roster themselves. They get the entrench ability and their ability to help out with the splash damage and damage of actual artillery pieces. So we will see how this character also plays out as Creative Assembly continues to do more reveals of all these characters. And I'm really excited to see this one added because in my video on the Master Engineer, it was something I think that Empire needed in a lot of ways. Empire is a gunpowder faction. That's what they're known through and through for. In the same way that the Dwarfs are, albeit Dwarfs are, I'd say, better at gunpowder than the Empire is. But on that same token, we don't have a character that outright buffs artillery. I mean, the Vampire Coast has a character like that, and the Empire doesn't. So it felt very lacking to not see this in the roster. Now, I don't know if Jort Grimm will be in or selectable as a multiplayer hero, and I really hope he is, because it would be cool to see how he could kind of help mix up how effective artillery pieces are in an Empire line. So I'm curious to see what his campaign abilities will be, and again, if he will be included in the multiplayer portion of Total War Warhammer 2's new DLC with the Hunter and the Beast. And that, I think, sums everything up here so far, guys. We've covered all four of Marcus's hunters or heroes, and we've talked about, Jort Grimm, we've talked about Kalara, Hertwig, and Roderick, and we've got a really good idea of where they come from a lore standpoint. And as we, again, start to get more fleshing out from more of the reveals coming in the next week or so, we'll see how these characters are going to play towards the grander campaign and towards grander Total War Warhammer 2 gameplay. Will these characters be accessible through Mortal Empire's Empire play if I'm not playing as Marcus Wulfhart? We'll see how these characters kind of flesh out the rest of the roster for Empire. But with so many things coming, as far as like the new regiments of renown that are single player exclusive, the new units that are coming to Empire, this is all a super exciting time. So I'm stoked to be covering every little bit of what's coming out so far, guys. Thank you so much for watching here and having patience with everything that's coming our way, and I'll continue to cover stuff as it comes out. But as always, have a good one and take care.